With the help of Hashem, we are learning Chagiga Daf Yud Aleph. We began the sugya on Daf Yud, the Mishnah, that categorized all of the mitzvahs into the following three categories and following the order of the Mishnah. Mitzvahs that are poirchin ba'avir, mitzvahs that have so little even hint in the written Chamishe Chumshei Torah that it's considered mitzvahs that are floating in the air. Then you have the next category of mitzvahs, as the Mishnah said, they are harodim hatuluyim b'sa'ara. They are like mountains, a lot of halachas that are hanging off a hair. And as Rashi understands Pshat, these mitzvahs are also not written explicitly in the Chumash, but there's a lot more words in the Chumash, so it's already considered hanging on a hair. And then you had the third and category in the Mishnah, which are the mitzvahs that the Mishnah calls Gufei Torah. Now, what the Gemara does to this Mishnah is so foundational, and again, these are sugyas that without Hasidus, people are mamish in the dark. And we should appreciate more the light that we were gifted, the light of Torah Chasidus. The Gemara today, at the end of the sugya, is actually going to read the Mishnah differently. The Gemara is going to actually say that there are four categories. All of this is extremely important. The Gemara is going to understand that the third category in the Mishnah uses the words that Yesh Lahen Al Mashi Yismoichu, which means that the mitzvahs are more or less written out. The mitzvahs have what to lean on. You're not hanging it off a hair, but it's still not referring to the parts of the mitzvahs that are written mamish explicit. And like, just for example, most of the dinim of tzaras are written explicit. Most of the dinim of karbanos are written explicit. In other words, there is a fourth category which is michtav ksive, they're spelled out. So what we're going to do, a big innovation. And even though the Mishnah concludes with the words hein hein gufei Torah, which is why we read the Mishnah yesterday in the beginning of the sugya as to Gufei Torah refers to the third category, the Gemara argues, correctly so, that Gufei Torah for a Yid is Torah Shabbal Peh. This is foundational. Gufei Torah is not the written word, because it's difficult for us to understand what Hashem wants from the written word. Gufei Torah goes to what we call the Torah Shabbal Peh. All of the three categories are equally Gufei Torah. That's why the Gemara says that it changes the word, it adds a letter in the final statement, as we'll read out in the Gemara. So really the Mishnah speaks about three categories, but it alludes to a fourth category. The fourth category is that which is Michtav Ksivi. And then the Mishnah concludes that all of the four categories are Gufei Torah. And behemshich to what we spoke out, Maimonides Hasidus, primarily in Parshas Matos, that there is the Torah of every world. It's all the same Torah, but it's formatted in the Oisias connected to that specific world. And now that we know that you have four Oilamas, Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, it fits even better with the Maskana that we're going to learn today. That there are really four categories of mitzvahs. And going back, the Michtav Ksivi, the Rabbeim say this concept, means that in the world of Atzilus, those mitzvahs which are the most relevant, whatever that means, in Atzilus, like we spoke out, the concept of Negoyim, higher than Atzilus, there won't even be a Nega. Lower than Atzilus, people are not on the level to have tzaras. That's why the Torah says the words Adam. Adam is the highest level of Adam, etc., etc. So anything that's the most relevant in Atzilus will be Michtav Ksivi, and the farther it goes away from Atzilus, then the less words you'll have for it in the Torah. And on that Seder. So the world of Bria will be the mitzvahs that they learn in Bria that are at least Yesh Lemamashi Yismoichu. In the world of Yetzirah, they primarily learn the mitzvahs that our Mishnah calls the Haradim Hatalohim Besara. It's amazing. And Oilam Asiyah is going to be Parchim Ba'avid. And I'm saying that Behegdim because we're going to start already today in Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis, the second chapter. And even though it's correct to say that the whole tractate of Chagiga primarily deals with two topics, Kachim, which will go until Daf Yud Ches, and then Taras, that begins on Daf Chai until the end. But we're going to have in the beginning of Ein Darshan, and we'll explain the link in a moment, almost 5 Daf of what one can call Maisa Merkava, Maisa Bereshis, very mystical concepts in the Torah. And the idea that certain things are Parchin Ba'avid And this is specifically to this physical world. That Hashem made the physical world in a way that it's hanging in outer space. Because the real pillars of the world, as we know, was Torah and Avodah and Gemilas Chasadim, and the Gemara is going to go through all of their emes of pillars. They're not physical pillars. So this world, the way it looks to in the naked human eye, is hanging in the air. And all of the mitzvahs that are most relevant to Olam Hazeh, dafka because it's a world of klippos, dafka because it's a world gashmi, those mitzvahs are the mitzvahs which you'll have the least amount of illusion, even of a remez, even in Torah Shebachsav. And because of that, just to conclude the sugya, we're going to learn today some details of the laws of dinim. Dinim means monetary laws. We're going to have some details of laws of tara. We'll have some details of laws of tuma. We're going to have some details of the laws of aroyos. And just to know al pinigla, that since we're going to learn in our Mishnah, the Mishnah mentions aroyos, which are the mitzvahs that are primarily written to. Most of the aroyos are michtav ksivei. The mamash spelled out. Some details are yesh lamamash yismoichu. It's not mamash written explicitly. That's the link that the next Perek will begin about teaching the laws of aroyos, which is a fascinating topic. Which is that there are basically 3 topics in the Torah that the Mishnah limits to how many students may one have while they are teaching it. And as we'll see, the aroyos cannot be taught to 3 students. The Gemara will explain why. Ma'aseh Bereishis, and let's just give the words. Ma'aseh Bereishis, which means the account of creation. Ma'aseh Merkava, the account of Merkava, has many meanings. Firstly, it's always good to know the pshat. There were Beraises that are called Ma'aseh Bereishis, Ma'aseh Merkava. And yes, and they deal with the account of creation, and they deal with the Merkava, and as we'll speak out more in a few daf ahead, that really we have in Nach, we have 3 Merkavas, and they either, al pi Chasidus, refer to the Olam Atzilus, Bria, and Yetzira, or to Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. And we're going to focus a little bit on the Merkava of Yeshaya, which is the highest Merkava. Then you have the Merkava of Yecheskel, which is a much more elaborate Merkava, which is a Merkava of a lower world. And we'll speak more about this in a few daf ahead. Now, the Rambam says, Ma'aseh Bereishis refers to the wisdom of the natural order. Ma'aseh Merkava refers to the mystical or the esoteric wisdom of the higher worlds. However, more of the other more mystical commentators write that Ma'aseh Bereishis is also mystical wisdom. The difference between Ma'aseh Bereishis and Ma'aseh Merkava is that Ma'aseh Bereishis is learning about these topics. It's mystical wisdom. Ma'aseh Merkava is the actual practice / experience of entering mystical worlds. And just like Aroyos has a limit to how many people you can teach it for certain practical reasons, Ma'aseh Bereishis and Ma'aseh Merkava also have a limit to how many people you can teach it. And we're going to touch upon the idea, and this is very important, that there are certain topics that are inappropriate fields of inquiry. Now, when we speak about inappropriate fields of inquiry, I know many people, I shout out to Zelig, and many people that joined our class recently, that will tell you that when they were younger and they had certain questions, the teachers frowned on asking. And that's not a good thing. They meant well, but that's not a good thing. Chassidus explains the meaning of there being certain fields where we disencourage inquiry. And just at least to give the words now, and we'll speak more about it later. There's called Yedias HaChiyuv and Yedias HaShlili. Certain things are knowable. Things that are physical are knowable. Even things that are not physical, that means they're not tangible, but if they belong to the Olam Hazeh, they are knowable. You can know what it is. You can understand what it is. The moment we begin to go deeper and deeper in the secrets of creation, and we start speaking about godliness, and especially when we start speaking about God, knowledge has to be on the level of negative knowledge. I know what it's not. Yedias HaShlila. And if a person is going to wrongfully try to know that which is unknowable with Yedias HaChiyuv, it is regarding this knowledge that the Mishnah, Torah Shebal Peh, this encourages and frowns on that approach. But it's important to know that all of these topics are learned. They are learned to the point that they are written in the Gemara, and they're written in the Mishnah. And furthermore, when we speak about topics that should not be taught to more than a certain amount of students, according to Al Pi Nigla, according to most poskim, that was only when the Torah was the oral Torah. And since Torah was oral, as we'll speak, when you're teaching it, if students are distracted, they might miss something, they might come to a wrong conclusion, they might think that a certain relation that is prohibited is permissible, etc. But once now the Torah is written, so then the limit of to how many people you can teach it is no longer relevant halachically because it's written. Everyone can read the book. And if someone will misunderstand it, adarabah, they have the book to open up and to clarify, and we'll leave a lot more comments to be made when we go more into the second chapter. But Chavra, let's start on Daf Yud Aleph, Amid Aleph. We left off 12 lines from the top of the Amid. So again, when you learn the Mishnah, it sounds like the Mishnah is giving in these three categories: Parchem ba'avid, Hararim hatuluyim besara, and the final one is Yesh lehem al nisha yasmeichu, the Gufei Torah. This is still referring to the middle category. So it's not completely hanging, flying in the air, but why is it called hanging on a hair? Because mikra muat v'halachis merubas. There is a little bit of mikra. You have a few words written to in the Torah, but there's so many halachas that are hanging off. Sometimes you have tile halachas hanging off one little letter. Now, Tana, we learned in a Braisa, the topic of negoyim. And again, the Maimari Chasidus that give us the light on this entire topic is Benegei and Negoyim. And the Tuma of Oyholois, says the Braisa, at least this is what it sounds, both of them are Mikra Muat Halachas Merubas. There's very little written about in the Chumash, and there's so many halachas. Now guys, Oholois, whoever learned Mishnayos, Oholois is one of the largest Masechtas. Yeah, and there's very few psukim in the Torah explicitly addressing the Tuma that is conveyed through oil. Negoyim is filled in the Chumash, Tazria and part of Mitzvahs. Frekti Gemara, how do you understand this Braisa? Negoyim mikra muat? No, Negoyim mikra merubahu. And for the Gemara, Amarav Papa, Haki Kamar. No, you got to amend the Braisa. Negoyim, we're contrasting. Negoyim is mikra meruba and v'halachis muatis. Ahalois, that's mikra muat v'halachis merubas. Now, Frekti Gemara, okay, umay nafkemina. So says the Gemara, I'll tell you the nafkemina. Think about this. If a person has a halachic question concerning a din in leprosy, opening up a chumash is an option because you might find the halacha from the chumash itself. Actually, looking at the chumash will be more enlightening than jumping right away to the Mishnah because it's mikra meruba. It's mamash spelled out. But then never look in the Chumash, because you won't know from the Chumash the halacha at all. Ayin b'masnisin, you have to look in the Mishnah, which is today meaning you have to look in Shulchan Aruch. A lot more to be said, but let's move weiter. Now, from here until the end of the Perek, now the Gemara is referring back to what we mentioned as the third category in the Mishnah before today's Chiddush, that we made it into four. But the last category in the Mishnah, which was, I'm just going back to the Mishnah, Dinim, which is monetary law, and the laws of Karbanos, and the laws of Taras, and the laws of Tumas, and the laws of forbidden unions known as Arroyos. And the Mishnah says that this, Yesh Lehem Al Masha Yismeichu. So Dinim, when it comes to monetary law, these are also parts of the Torah that are very clearly spelled out. So the Gemara clarifies, yes, some of dinim is michtav ksivi. Now I already gave a heads up. There's a fourth category, michtav ksivi. Then there's the one right before it, and that is, it's mikra meruba, but you still have not everything written clearly. There are some parts of dinim that are not explicitly spelled out. And as an example, nitzracha, this statement is for that which Rebbe holds. The Tanya, and the guys, we are familiar with this Braisa in Chumash Rashi Chitas. Rebbe Yomer, this is referring to a pasuk in Mishpatim. The pasuk is speaking about two men fighting, and tragically one man is trying to kill his fellow. So the first pasuk speaks about him accidentally striking a pregnant woman, causing for her to abort her fetus. We're going to come back to that in a moment. Then it says in the next verse, but if he killed that woman, now here's the topic. He intended to kill, but not her. He wanted to kill one person, but he ended up killing another person. Is this considered a mazid? is this a violation on the level where there's going to be an abased in capital punishment? And the Torah writes regarding the second case where he was trying to strike Shimon, and he ended up accidentally striking a woman, and he killed her. So the pasuk says, nefesh tachas nefesh. And if you remember in Chumash, the Rashi writes that there's a machlokes how to understand it. So the Chachamim hold, even though he wasn't intending to kill her, since he was intending to be a Retzeyach, Rachmana litzlan, that's called a capital sin. Chayav Misa. And therefore, nefesh, tachas nefesh should be understood literally. However, Rebbe holds, no, mamain. Nefesh, tachas nefesh means that you have to pay. Now, how do you monetize the value of a human being? That's a bigger topic. When there was a slave market, how much would this woman be worth there? Excuse me. To whom do you pay the money to? To her heirs. She got killed. She's a victim. But before those details, even though the Torah writes...
Is that similar to the eye for an eye?
Exactly, Kevin. So when the Torah writes an eye for an eye, no one understands that to be taken literally. But here there's a machlokes. Rebbe is the one that says don't read it literally, mamain. And Rebbe explains why. Rebbe is like asking on himself. Ato emin mamain, maybe it's nefesh mamish, because don't forget at the end that he had kavana to kill. It's only that this is called, that neschavin lezeh v'harek someone else. So answers Rebbe, I'll tell you how I know that this nefesh, tachas nefesh means not literally, means mammon. Because it says nisino lamato, and this is our pasuk, v'nosato nefesh tachas nefesh. In one verse prior, it says the word nisina, it says v'nosan b'flilim. Again, that's the first case where he strikes a pregnant woman, and Achmana Litzlan, he causes the fetus to get aborted. And there the Torah says, v'nasan b'flila means he has to compensate. Again, how do you monetize it? That's not negaya now. He pays a monetary penalty. The Torah uses the words v'nasan. So Rebbe understands, you make this link of nesina. Malahalon in the verse prior, the word v'nasan means monetary mammon. Afkan, even though there was intent to kill, but that shitas Rebbe, that if you didn't have intent to kill the one who you ended up killing, that's not on the level of a capital sin for which you're going to be penalized in a Sanhedrin, for which you're going to be chayav mis. In other words, we're just trying to find a detail in dinim that's not michtav ksivi. And therefore, it's taka almost clear. It's not called harara matloim ba'avir. And I would argue, Kevin, to your point, because we have in many other psukim in the Torah, ayin tachas ayin, shein tachas shein, which never means literally. So nefesh tachas nefesh, it meaning money, is not that far-fetched. But still, you can't say that it's written explicitly because literally it means a life for a life. And Rebbe says it's not a life, it's money. Next, avoidus. Avoidus means the service in the Beis Hamikdash. Now that's Chevra, my friend Chumash Vayikra, Parshas Tzav, and so many other details that are written so clearly. So that should be Michtav Ksiva, and it's more than just Yesh Lahen Al Mashi Yismeichu. So here again, that's not a kasha, because this Yesh Lahem and not explicit is needed for the rules of conveying the blood. And when we will learn the Zvachim, Emenachas, Kachim, the beginning of Kachim is the understanding that there are 4 foundational steps in the offering of every korban. Whether it's animal, whether it's flour. By the animal korbanos, the 4 steps is Shchita. The next step is called Kabbalah. You receive the dam in a mizrak, in a basin. The next step is, if needed, you convey it, you walk it towards the altar. Now, if you received the dam mamish adjacent to the mizbeach, you don't need to do haylacha. Haylacha is not a essential step, but if you do haylacha, it's considered a step, and all of the rules that limit other steps will be connected to this step as well. And then the final step is zrika, which is either throwing or pouring or sprinkling the dam on various parts of the altar, each one according to its korban. So it's interesting like this. The Torah speaks about shechting, but actually shechting doesn't have to be done by a kohen. After the Torah speaks about shechting, it says in a Braisa, it says right after shechting, it says vihi krivu. Vikrivu literally means you should bring it near. So say Chazal, what does God mean? It says shech the animal, bring it near must mean Kabbalah Saddam. Must mean that, because right after what comes after shechita is receiving the dam. Now the word literally means bringing it near. So even though it's actually referring to Kabbalah, why did Hashem use an expression of bringing the blood near? Says the oral Torah, we express this concept by using a word that connotes conveying. Why? And where do we find that? Where do we see that vehikriv means conveying? Even though also it's common sense, bringing it near. But you have a pasuk, because it says vehikriv hakoynes hakoil, and right after the Torah uses the words vehikriv, it says he should then burn it on the altar. The flow means bring it to the altar and then burn it on the altar. And v'amar mar, that the verse that we just quoted, vehikriv hakoyin vehiktir, refers to walking the limbs to the ramp. So lememra the haylacha leitapka michlal Kabbalah, and that's to teach you that all of the many rules we have concerning Kabbalah, like just for example, that if the kohen that's makabel the dam has a machsheves that this is for another balabas, or this is another carbon type.
Pigul.
So you have pigul, you have noiser, you have shalashma, all of the different halachas which are enacted, which go into effect during these 4 steps, we know explicitly that they are connected to the step of Kabbalah. So the reason why the Torah hints to Haylacha is to tell you that they also affect Haylacha. Even though Haylacha is not essential, that's a Chiddush. In other words, I can shech the animal near the altar and I don't even need to convey it. But if I am conveying it, it's a step. And all of these, a machsheva spigel will be mafagel the carbon. All right, then the Mishnah said again, Taharis. Here again, Tuman Tara, that's mamash pure atzilus. Michtav Ksivan, they're clearly written in the Torah. Loi, that nitzrcha, the detail that's not explicitly written, it's yesh lahen al masha yismoichu, but it's not written. Elo l'shiur hamikvah. It's to the quantity of mayim that you need in a mikvah. That the loy ksiva, that's not written explicitly. And as we learned in a brayso, that when it says in Parshas Mitzvahs, in the context of someone who has a seminal omission, tumaskeri, Torah writes v'rachatz. Guys, we're going to skip the parentheses because it's not written in the Chumash. V'rachatz ba'mayim, and Rashi emphasizes that not shva under the base, but a patach under the base. V'rachatz ba'mayim teaches you b'mei mikvah. B'mei mikvah. What does b'mei mikvah mean? Rashi says b'mei mikvah means waters that are designated for the mikvah, not mayim she'uvim. Mayim she'uvim means that a mikvah means water is now gathered in a certain place. How did it get there? If prior to it getting there, it was previously gathered in a keli, which would normally be the way that we, carry water from here to there, that's called gathered water. Even though now you put it in a mikvah, it's not kosher. So that's what Rashi understands. Like ba'mayim means, again, mayim hamiyuchadim. Tosfos says no. Tosfos agrees with the rule that a mikvah may not be made with mayim she'uvim, but Tosfos learns that the word ba'mayim is coming to teach you that the water has to be ashboiden. Ashboiden means that the water cannot be leaking. It has to be stationary. In other words, it cannot be zoichalin. The only waters that are allowed to be flowing, and we know that from the mikvah of the Arizal, is if you go into mayim chayim. If you go into a spring water, then they don't have to be stationary. But if it's not now a natural spring, if it's rainwater, so then but we hold to both dinim. You won't be allowed to gather it in kalim to bring it into the mikvah. You have to make sure that the mikvah doesn't have any cracks. So either one or the other is learned from B'mayim. And then when the Torah says eskol b'sarai, all of his flesh, that's the teacher mayim shkol gufa yoylo bahem. That's the shear. It has to be enough water that an average person can be completely submerged, fully in it, under it. And how much is that? Ama alama berum shalosh amas. If you have a cubicle that is 1 amma by 1 amma, by the height of 3 amas, and how much water is that in measurements? So that's not something that's written michtav ksivi, even though it's alluded to with the words eskol b'sarei, yesh lehem al masha yismoichu, but it's not michtav ksivi. Next, meis, laws of impurities. Here again, michtav ksiva. Answers the Gemara, no. This detail is not written. What detail is not written? If you have, there's 8 type of creatures that are called shiratzim. That means they have very little legs, and when they crawl, it looks like they're crawling on their bellies. Not all of them, but 8 of them, when they are dead, they convey tumah. Let's say a mosquito or a cockroach doesn't convey tumah. A rat, a mouse, and the other ones that are enumerated in the psukim there, they convey tumah when they're dead. Now, how much of a dead sheretz is needed for it to convey tumah? Not the whole sheretz, even only a piece in the size of a lentil. That's the rule. Now, where do we get that from? The Lake Siv, it's not written. It's learned out. Yesh lahem amashi yismeichu. The time, as we learned, it says bahem. Now this is quoting a pasuk in Parsha Shmini that's speaking about tumah shiratzim. The Torah writes Eila hatmeim lachem b'chol hasheretz kol hanogeya bahem. Now bahem implies in all of it. Something had contact with all of it. So yachol, you would think that taka, it only conveys tumah if it's bikulan. But if there's only a part of the dead sheretz, it can convey tumah. No, there's another pasuk, and the pasuk writes mayhem, which mamash sounds like it's a contradiction. The Rashi quotes, the pasuk writes right afterwards that koil asher yipel olav mayhem b'moisam. Mayhem if something from them fell, not if all of them fell. Mayhem means only a little bit. So you would think any part, the most minute part. Oh, so it says bahem. In other words, there are two words. One indicates only all of it. The other word indicates only a little part of it. So how do you reconcile that? So this is already not explicit. It works, it fits. You have to have a part that's at least large enough that you can argue that this part is equivalent to the whole. No, which one from these Shmoyne Shratzim, when they're born, when they're little, how large are they? So the Chaimet, I know there's a machlokes on every one of the 8, but let's go that Chaimet means a snail. If Chaimet means a snail, when the snail is an infant, it has the size of a lentil. So in other words, it's not only if a baby snail died does it convey tumah. A piece of any of the 8 in the size of a lentil, since there is one of the 8 that all of it has that size when it's a baby, that's the minimum shear. And by the way, not everyone agrees that the size is a adasha. Second to last line in the Amid, Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Yehuda holds that there another size. Now, I don't know whether this size is bigger, whether the size is smaller, but he holds also to reconcile the mayhem and the bohem, that the solution will be a piece of a dead sheretz, of those 8, in the size of a tail of a halta'a, which is a lizard. Now, the reason why we're picking on the lizard, see, the snail is the smallest. The lizard has a unique characteristic, that if you cut the tail off a lizard, it still thrashes about. And it looks like it has its own life force. In other words, it looks like a living sheretz. So if any piece of any of sheretz has the size of a tail of a halta'a, that's where it's taka only mayhem, but it's almost like it's bohem. Point is, this detail, again, is not written clearly. That's why it falls into the third category of yesh lahem al mashi yismeichu. And the final example the Mishnah gave was the laws of forbidden unions, of arayos. And again, frek the Gemara, why is this yesh lahem al mashi yismeichu? It's even more. It's written michtav ksivan Parshas Achrimois, and many other places with all the details. Answers the Gemara, loi. That nitztracha, when are we only including it in the category of yesh al mashi yismeichu daf yud aleph amid beis? That's one detail of a forbidden, one specific case that's taka not written too explicitly. And that will be the case of bitoy ma'anusasei, which is a terrible case, but we got to learn the dinim. You know, if a man, God forbid, raped someone, and the victim, the woman, got pregnant and had a daughter. So can the father have a relation with her? Now you can't say the Torah spoke about bitoy. The Torah prohibited a man having a relation, a sexual relation with his daughter or granddaughter, because if you only would have had those psukim, you might have only understood it to forbid a child that comes from a kosher union, a daughter from a kosher union. Or a man married halachically his wife and her daughter from a prior kosher union. You don't have explicitly in the Torah that if there is a bitoy from a anusasai, from a woman that he raped, that is also included. He also may not have a relation with her. It's not written clearly. And how do you know it? The Amarava, that Amalei Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi. Now guys, we're going to unpackage this more, God willing, when we learn Yevamis daf Tzadik Zayin. But it's interesting that in Kachim, Many times we don't allow to make a double hekish, if you remember that topic. But in other areas of Torah, you can make a double hekish. Here we're going to learn about a double Gzeira Shava. Without going to it's a technical thing. Again, we'll speak it out with more detail, Yevamas Tzadik Zayin. But when you compare Heina and Zima, if you compare all of these verses together by making this double Gzeira Shava, then you come to the conclusion that when the Torah forbids a man having a relation with his daughter, it even includes Bitoy Ma'anusasai. I think that one Gzeira Shava is called Michtav Ksivi. That's the way I understand it. This is only called Yesh Lamamashi Yismaicha because it's a double Gzeira Shava. And now the Mishnah concluded with the words Heinin Gufei Torah. Now guys, we learned the Mishnah, the Havamina and Torah is Torah. Until this Gemara, the Mishnah seemingly was giving three categories. And it sounds from these words, if these words would not be amended, then the third category, which is the category Yesh Lahen Al Masha Yismaichu, that's also called Gufei Torah. Hein Gufei Torah. The Gemara rejects it. The Gemara rejects it because, what are you talking about? Even if something is only Parchin Ba'avir, even if something, I'll go more, if something is Halacha L'Moshe Misinai. Halacha L'Moshe Misinai means there isn't even a little remez. That's Torah. So Frek the Gemara about Hani in Hanachloi, the other categories are not Gufei Torah. Gufei Torah is all of the oral Torah. So therefore you have to amend it. I know it's only one letter, but it changes everything. Elohema hein vehein gufei Torah. Wow. In other words, the Mishnah gave three categories by explicitly, and implicitly the Mishnah gave four categories, because even the third category in the Mishnah is not that which is written. So there is a fourth category of michtav ksivi, and on all of these categories, Heim veheim are gufei Torah. One doesn't have a greater power over the other. It's not about if it's written more clearly, there's some upside. No, b'chlal not. Torah is that which Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu. That is Torah. That's gufei Torah. And for some divine reason, like we explained, Al Pi Chasidus, some of it is written to more, some of it is written more in the Chumash, some of it is written more in Mishnah, some of it is written more in the Gemara, some of it remains oral, but all of it, hein vehein gufei Torah. With this we say that Hadran Alach, we will return to you Hakoil Chayavim, the first chapter of Chagiga, and now with tremendous joy we are starting this Ein Darshan. Ein Darshan is going to be the chapter that's going to move Daf Yud Ches over from Kachim to Taris, but until for the next couple of Dafim, we're going to speak about the deepest parts of the Torah, and Hashem should enlighten us to have some grasp, some inkling, some light, some understanding of everything that we will be learning. I would like to dedicate over here this whole topic of Ma'aseh Bereishis and Ma'aseh Merkava to a young girl that needs a refuah shalema. Her name is Eva Shaloimus Bas Ilana Esther. May she indeed have a miraculous refuah shalema. Amen. Now the link, how are we getting into this mystical topic, is very clear. Since the last Mishnah in the first chapter, the Mishnah on Daf Yud, mentioned Aroyos, actually Aroyos was the last topic that the Mishnah puts into the last category of Yesh Lahen Al Masha Yismaichu. So the Mishnah wants to tell you something unique, which is that there are only three topics in the whole Torah in which we put a limit as to how many students you can teach it to. And the first one will be Aroyos. Zok the Mishnah, Ein Darshan Ba'aroyos Bishloisha. You may not teach the laws of forbidden unions Bishloisha. Now the Havamina will be, without the Gemara's amending the word, Bishloisha means in three, in a group of three. How would you get a group of three? Teacher is one, two Talmidim. That is the Havamina. That means you can only teach a teacher to student, one-on-one. If you have two Talmidim with the teacher, that's the third, Bishloisha, you may not teach it. That's the Havamina. We will go ahead.
So what about nowadays, where you go online?
So I just mentioned, so we mentioned in the intro, just to quickly repeat, that since these rules were said prior to Rabbeinu HaKadosh and his generation writing down the Torah, that was one thing. Once it's written down, so forget about online. Online is just an extension of the written down. It's written down for everyone. Changes. You'll see the reason why the Gemara gives is irrelevant once it's written. But let's go back to the Mishnah. You cannot teach the laws of forbidden unions, bishloisha. Havamina, in a group of 3, including the teacher. Now that the Mishnah is mentioning the limit of how many Talmidim when it comes to the laws of Aroyos, so there's 2 other topics in the entire Torah, Maaseh Bereishis, Maaseh Merkava, as we mentioned in the intro, that they also have this type of limit with a different number. V'loi b'Maaseh Bereishis bishnayim. Again, the Havamina means that you can't even teach it bishnayim, teacher, student. Now what would that mean? That would mean at least you can learn it on your own. You can't teach it. V'loi b'Merkava, not even b'Yachid. If we were to follow the premise that b'shloisha means including the teacher, that means you can't even learn Merkava on your own. Unless the person is a chacham, that means he has both chachma and bina and das. Chachma, bina, das. Chacham umevin b'datei. Problem is that if a person doesn't have the Chabad, then how would he even learn it on his own? So once he who is the Mishnah referring to when he says loy b'merkava b'yachid? We'll unpackage the question more, and we're going to reformulate the whole Mishnah. Now, what we're going to learn right now is a continuation of Maaseh Bereishis and Maaseh Merkava. Kol hamistakel ba'arba devarim. Whoever will scrutinize the following 4 topics, rasuloi, it would be better off for him, for him not to have come into the world. And let me again, this is so important for people, God forbid, not to misunderstand it on any level, that there are certain topics that we should not ask about. No, God forbid. It means that certain topics, we have to begin with the premise that our knowledge will only be Yedias Hashlila. We cannot know it directly. And that's the meaning, it would be better for you not to come into the world. Because before we come into this world, when the neshama is in the world of Bria, when the neshama is in the world of Atzilus, it knows it with a Yediyah Chiyuvi, not only with a Yediyah Shlili. But now that we are in this Olam Haza Gashmi, we can't approach it by direct knowing it. We can only know what it is not. And what are the topics? Malamaila, malamata, malafana, maila achar. The words are what is above, what is below, what is in front, what is in back. Let's go with one approach. Maila and mata is makim. What is it that comes? What is lamaila mahamakim? And what is before and what is later is time. What is beyond zman? What is, just to know, what is l'mayla mizmanu makim? Now we know that even in the higher worlds, the zmanu makim is b'chlal not the way it's experienced over here. But zman umakim is a result of the 10 spheres. And with greater detail, al pi Kabbalah, that makim, space, is a product of Hashem's 6 emotions, because space, as we know it, has 3 directions. 3 dimensions. 3 dimensions means 6 directions, right, left, front, back, up and down. And every one is simply an expression of one of Hashem's 6 midos, Chesed, Tiferes, Netzach, Hoid, and Yesod. And Chachma and Bina is the cause and the source of Zman. So if you want to understand, let's use Hasidic words, the moment you're going to the Oir Ein Sof that's beyond the 10 spheres, the Ein Sof, Lamaila from the Seder Ishtalshalus, then you can never know what it is. And if you want to know what it is, then you can't be part of this world. Now, if a person is trying to be Megashim, these abstract topics, by trying to figure out what they are, it's disrespectful to Hashem. So it would be better off for him not to come into the world. Now, many people explain that Maila Mala, Maila Mata, Maila Fana, Maila Acher is a reference to Maaseh Bereishis, that is a topic that we cannot know through a Yediyah Chiyuvis, only through a Yediyah Shlilis. And the final topic of Kol Shalichas Al Kavod Koinoi is already speaking about, let's say, the mystical experience, that if we don't approach it the right way, then Rasuloi Shalei Bala Oilam. Okay, let's move on. So before we're going to come to Maaseh Bereishis, Maaseh Merkava, first we're going to understand the Mishnah's flow cannot work based on our understanding, which is based on the words that we have, Bishloisha. You're telling me again, oh, this is all bait. If you can't learn Arayas with 3, if it means teacher and students, it means you can't teach it to 2 students. So Maaseh Bereishis means, but you can teach it, you can teach it to 1 student. So Maaseh Bereishis means you can't even teach it to one student, but you can learn it on your own. Maaseh Merkava, you're going to get trapped. Because then, could you not learn it on your own? And of course, if you're not a Chacham Amevim Bedatoi, then how would you learn it on your own? So when it says V'loy Merkava B'yachid, and then it says Ella Im Kein Hoya Chacham Amevim Bedatoi, it doesn't make sense. Could you not learn it? And if you don't have yourself, whatever type of Chachma bin and Das does one need to figure that out on their own, or to get to it on their own, Mimanavshach, either you have it or you don't have it. If you have it, then you could, and if you don't have it, then you won't know it. If you're not grasping it, you're not violating anything. So answers the Gemara, Hachi Ka'amar. Reinterpret the whole Mishnah. Even though the Mishnah uses the letter Beis in front of 3, it must mean with Alamid. Ein darshan barois lishloisha. You can't teach the laws of forbidden unions to 3 students, but you could teach it to 2 talmidim. You just up the Talmud. Now everything is going to work. And let's go further. If a loy b'maaseh bereishis, you can't teach it to 2 students, but you can teach it to 1 student. You could teach it to 1 student. V'loy b'markava liyachid. Now, can you teach Merkava to a student? So the answer is you have to pick your students very carefully. To an average student, you can't teach it. Only if the student is already a Chacham Amevim Daitai, then you will teach Maaseh Merkava in a way that you'll never tell the student exactly what it is, but you're going to tell them enough information, exactly what the Rambam does in a big chelik of Meir Nevuchim, that he gives us all of the key words in Yecheskel, in the Merkava, and then he says, now that he gave you those key words and what they mean, and now that the Rambam tells us what parts of the Merkava we should focus on, now if we have prior Chachma Bin and Das, we'll be able to understand it on our own. Okay, now let's go to the first one. You can't teach Arois Bishloisha, and we just clarified that means you can't teach it to 3 Talmidim. 2 students, yeah, or 1 of course, but not to 3. Why not? My Tama. Now, if it's some sort of scriptural reason, as I state, and where would you find that? It says in Achri Mois, the opening is Ish Ish. Ish Ish means any man. But it's not any man, it's man, ish. Al kol she'er b'sadai, to any, cannot approach any of his close relatives. So maybe the pshat is ish, man is 2. She'er b'sadai, close relative, is another. Schad, that's 3. And the Torah says, it'll be like a drasha. Loi sikrivu legalis erva. The pshat of loi sikrivu legalis erva means, don't even interact with them in a way that it's bringing you too close to them, even prior to actually doing the deed. Right, the harchakis. But here we're making a drasha. Loisikrivu legalis erva means don't approach 3 people to teach them the laws of forbidden unions. Gemara says that can be. Because there are other times where the Torah uses the words ish. Even though the Torah there is not speaking about teaching anything, it's speaking about practicing something, or the prohibition of practicing something, and we can never say that those isurim are only if you have 2 people doing them together. For example, El Ma'ata, when it says, Ish ki yakalal elikov, God forbid, blasphemy, ish. But what do you think? Only if 2 people, bless God together, is there a problem? Or where it says, Ish ashi'itim mizari l'moilach, certain practice of pagan idol worship. What, hachinami? Of course not. Even if 1 person does it, they're chayiv. Elo, no. The Gemara says, no. Over there, I know why it says ish. Miboyelei l'rabais es hagoyim. Maybe ish. If you can give this the meaning, then you can't go further. And indeed, that the goyim, like the Yidden, they are commanded in Birchas Hashem. It's one of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, and they are commanded in not participating in Avodah Zarah. One of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, like a Yid is commanded to keep. Masha'en came over here, but it's not true. One of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach is Aroyas. Now I know their details are not the same, but so what? But they are generally included in the prohibition. Hainami mi boyelei, the first white line, l'rabas es hagoyim, shemuzarim alai Aroyas ki Yisrael. Okay, so the ish is out of the window. Another attempted answer. Elo amid chsiv. When it says, and a pasuk over there in Achri Mois Bayarois, that ushmartem es mishmarti, that you should observe my safeguard. This is a pasuk at the end of Achri Mois, at the end of the portion of forbidden unions. So maybe let's teach ushmartem, you shall observe, is written in Lashon HaKodesh in the plural. You means two. Mishmarti my, there's only one God, so there's one. Chad. And it says furthermore, again, a remez that we're speaking about teaching, where it says levilti asois mechukais hatoi evois. So levilti asois mechukais means not to teach the laws of that which is abominable. That can be, because same type of question. When it says regarding Shabbos, ushmar temes ha-Shabbos, or what, only two people together are commanded not to break the Shabbos, and one person can be mechal Shabbos, ushmar temes ha-matzois. Or where it says ushmartem es mishmeres hakodesh, that's regarding tuma kodesh and the mizbeach. But in all of these cases, hachinami, only if there's two people. No. So therefore, there's no scriptural source for the rule that we now clarified that you are not allowed to teach the laws of forbidden unions to a group of three or more. You can only teach it to two or to one. Elamar Ravashi, that my ein darshan ba'aroyos b'shloisha, it doesn't refer to the general rules of aroyos, but ein darshan b'sisrei aroyos. There are certain hidden details. First of all, we just had on top of this amid bitoy ma'anusasai, but that's an added prohibition. There are, however, certain unions, certain times, or certain unions that people think that are forbidden, and they're not that forbidden. And that may never be taught to three people or more. And the reason for that would be, my Tama Sfarahu, it's logical. And I'll say it by heart. When it's one-on-one, then you engage the student. Even when a teacher is teaching two students, one student has a question, the other student will listen to the question and answer. But the moment you have three students or more, what happens is that if one student asks a question, the teacher will answer the question. Since there are two other students, they might start talking to each other. And the teacher then might say something to the one who asked that is so foundational to understanding the law. And they'll miss it. And they might end up doing something that's forbidden, thinking that it's permitted. Gavaldik. Svaru. Beitrei, when there are only two Talmidim, Kiyosvu Kameh the Rabbi that are sitting in front of their teacher, even if one is going to ask a question and the teacher will answer him, Chad Shakal the Tori Bahadei Rabbi, even if the teacher is only focusing on one student, but the other student is by himself. So he'll listen. Ve'idach matzli udnei, he'll incline his ear ligamara to the teachings. But the moment you have three people or more, if one of them will start engaging, start talking to the Rebbe, today the other two, they're two. Sometimes Shakli v'Tori b'Hadi they'll begin conversing in Torah. They'll begin talking to themselves. But the Loyodi might come at Abai, but they're going to miss some information. If you're speaking about Sisrei Aroyos, in other words, that which is written explicitly, you can teach to three or more. That which is not written explicitly, again, especially when we're speaking about a heter or something that people think is forbidden, and the Rebbe gives a heter, and then he limits the heter when he's speaking to one student. They did not hear that limitation. They'll take the, God forbid, they'll do something that's forbidden. And Kevin, that goes back to what you asked again. We said it in the intro. In other words, the moment everything is written, and now everything is spoken, especially when everything can be played back, technology, you don't have such this concern doesn't exist anymore. No, this is not an inherent prohibition. This is a logical, don't teach something that is detailed and people don't know the details, people don't have access to the details, because people might end up doing something prohibited. They'll hear half of a class. They're going to miss a detail. Problem is, why is that only concerning...
That was my question. It applies to anything you learn in a group.
Ask them what applies to everything. That's a bomb question, of course. And the answer is like this, is that there is no activity that is as tempting to a person as forbidden unions. That's the answer. So let's go. By other things, a person will say, I'm not sure, let me ask again, I wasn't paying attention. By Aroyas, there's such a drive. Okay, Iachi Kolatayra Nami answers the Gemara Aroyas Shani. Aroyas is unique. Why? The Amar Mar, the master, taught us in Makkos that these two sins, Gezel, theft, the taiva for money, and Aroyas, Nafshoy, Mechamdasan, we covet, Umesavolahem, and we desire. more than all the other prohibitions. Oh, hold on. So we answered the question, but now we're back to Gezel. What about the laws of Gezel? Iyachi Gezel Nami. We should have this limitation. Don't teach it to a group of 3 or more. So the Gemara says, in between these two, you can't compare one to the other. Arayos, bein befanav, bein shalei befanav, whether the object is in front of you or not, nafesh yitzrei, you have a big desire. When do people, so to say, feel kavod, desire, gezel? Only if it's there. Befanav, nafesh yitzrei. Shalei befanav, loy nafesh yitzrei. So we're not concerned that people will miss a part of the class and they'll end up stealing by thinking it's mutter. In other words, we rationalize that which we desire, and that which we desired the most is where we have the greatest fear of rationalization, and people who learn a little bit and don't learn it all are the ones that can make the biggest mistakes, and that's why ein darshan ba'aroyis b'shloisha, which means lishloisha. Oh, and now we understand better that ma'aseh bereishis, whether it's B'raises Ma'aseh Bereishis, whether it's the knowledge of the natural order, or whether we're going to follow the approach throughout, that both Ma'aseh Bereishis and Ma'aseh Merkava is mystical wisdom. Difference is, one is wisdom, one is learning, and one is experience practicing. It's like Kabbalah and Kabbalah Ma'ases. Okay, and so Ma'aseh Bereishis, you cannot, the Mishnah says you cannot teach it to 2 people, which means you could teach it to 1, but to anyone, if they're kosher. And Ma'aseh Merkava, you have to be very careful who is the one to whom you teach it. That is more or less, that's the way the Gemara clarified the Mishnah. So let's begin diving into Ma'aseh Bereishis. V'loi b'Ma'aseh Bereishis b'shnayim. Mino animili. Where do we have a source that you cannot teach it to 2? Why not? The answer, the logic that we gave before is not relevant here, because we said when there are 2 Talmidim, you will always have the attention of both, even if only one is interacting with the Rebbe. The Tana Rabbanon, it says in Parshas Va'eschanon, Ki sha'al no l'yamim rishonim, when you will inquire about the earlier days. And this inquiry is referring to Ma'aseh Bereishis. From here you see, Yachid shoyel, ve'en shnaim shoyalim, a source. That's the meaning. You can't teach Ma'aseh Bereishis to 2, you can teach it to 1. It's a one-on-one topic. Yachal yishal adam koydem shenivra ha'olam. But you would think the one can ask anything, or the one can assume that he can get an understanding in a direct way for any topic, even of that which comes beyond the world. Lamaila, as we'll see, it's really lamaila mahazman v'hamakim. So that's why Talmud Loimer there in Va'eschanon, that what could you ask about? Lemin hayoyim hashebar l'kim adam ala aretz. Only you can ask about from when man was created on the world, but not anything that came prior to that. Now, by the way, that has to be further clarified, because man was created on the 6th day of creation. Yachol, if that will be the case, does it mean you can't even inquire about what happened on day 1, day 2, day 3? Only you can only ask from day number 6, and maybe only from day number 6, from the 10th hour, from when Adam was created. No. That's why it says even for what came before you. So Yachol Yishal Adam. So in other words, you can go beyond the creation of Adam. But what is the limit? So that's the limit. That Yachal Yishal Adam Maila Malamata. Maila Lamata will learn if you think that a person can inquire with the goal of understanding in a direct way that which is beyond space, and that which is beyond, before and after, beyond time, Lamaila Mahazman. That's why the Torah says that you can only grasp from one edge of the heavens to the other edge of the heavens, meaning miliksei hashemayim v'akatzei hashemayim. Yes, Adam shoyel, but v'iyata shoyel ma'alamayla ma'alamata nor ma'alafonim ma'ala'acher. Let's go a little bit into Daf Yud Beis. Frek the Gemara. Hold on. Hashdam the nafkala miliksei hashemayim v'akatzei hashemayim. Now that we already limited our inquiry to that which is within the world, so to say, shemayim is place to place, makoim. So lemin hayoyim shebar lekim asadam ala aretz lamali. Why do we have to have this word that is referring to Zman? And I'll tell you even deeper. Since really, al pi Kabbalah, the creation of makoim comes after the creation of Zman. Zman and makoim is the same. Time and space is the same, but Zman is a more ruchniistic space. They are past, present, future. It's all space. So if a person is unable to know bo'ofen chiyuvi, that which is beyond makoim, then for sure, there's no need to say that you can't grasp in a chayuvisdik way what's lamay lama hazman. So why is that needed? And indeed, the Gemara says that pasuk l'min hayoim, you can only know from when Zman begins. You cannot understand it in a direct way. What is that is lamay lama hazman? This pasuk is telling you that which Rabbi Elazar taught us. To Amar Rabbi Elazar, that Adam Harishain min haaretz ad l'rakia. Adam Harishain was from the earth until the heavens. We'll explain soon what this means. Al pi Chasidus, and that's the pasuk. Shenamar as it says, l'min hayom shebaro l'kim Adam al haaretz, and you have to add, and it says u'limiktzei hashamayim ad ketzei hashamayim. In other words, from when God created him on the ground until the edge of the heavens, he was that big. But Kivan Shasarach, once he failed with the chaitz of the eitz hadas, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yolav, Hashem put his hand on him, umei atoy, and God diminished him. Shenamar as it says, a pasuk in Tehillim, in referring to Adam, Okoir Vokedem Tzartani, which means that later and earlier you formed me, which means that he was almost like formed twice. And so he was formed once. When was he formed twice? Vatoshas olai kapecha, when you put your hand on me. Now, a lot to say here, but let's go another line. Another expression. Not that Adam was from the earth until the heavens, but this expression is that Adam Arishan initially was from one end of the world until the other. Not from earth until the heaven, but from one end of the world to the other. Shenamar as it says, so miksei hashmayim means the ganze world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yodei Olav umeyate, God diminished him. Shenamar as it says, the same verse, that Tosha Salai Kapecha. Problem is, was he from the earth until the Rakia, or was he from one end of the world to the other? And the Gemara says, it's all the same thing. So give a little bit of insight that we have, and this is actually in Igeres HaKodesh Igeres Zayin. The Alter Rebbe, as printed at the end of Tanya, is speaking about the concept of Ashreinu Matoiv Chalkeinu, that every Jew has dear chelik in the Torah, and every Jew has dear chelik in the world. And he quotes what we have in Kabbalah, and this is a very interesting. If someone were to ask you who was the first Jew, and you would say Avram, you would give the right answer. If you would ask someone what makes someone a Jew, and you would say their godly soul, that is the only answer. Now, how they get it, that's the second step. They were born from a Jewish mother, but there was a time that they debated that, a Giur Kahalacha. What makes a person a Jew is them having a Jewish neshama. It's good to know that Adam Harishan had this neshama. The godly soul was gifted to Adam. And not only that, as it says in the Zohar, that neshama had in it all of the Taryag parts, and really broken down into 600,000 parts, and every part has more, and their sparks and their branches. And had Adam not sinned, the original plan was Adam Chava and his 5 children that we know about. And that's it. Cain and the twin, Hevel and the 2 twins. But now that Sarach, so what really happened is that Sarach blemished all of the neshama of Adam. And now every Yid that's going to be born, unless that person has a neshama chadasha, but every Yid is going to get a certain part of the neshama of Adam Harishon. Now, it's also a generational thing. Certain generations got the head, and certain generations got the hands. We are called the Doir of Ikvasa, the Ikvasa, the Mashiach, because our sparks are coming from the heel of Adam Harishon. We come from the heel. And the Torah is also divided into parts, and every neshama is connected to a part in the Torah, and every neshama and part of the Torah is connected to a part in the world. The Alter Rebbe explains why Bahashgacha Pratis, you live and I live exactly where you live. And it is exactly over here that my spark, in other words, Adam Harishon got diminished, because everything was in him. Everything was in him, which means not only did he have the ganze godly soul, but everything that Hashem put into the universe, from the highest worlds until Olam Hazeh Agashmi, all of it was in the neshama and is in the neshama of Adam. He takes up the whole world. Elaman, now that he failed, the realization, the expression of this neshama has to happen through every single yid that's going to live until the coming of Mashiach. Now there is a concept, what we call a neshama chadasha. That means there are certain godly souls that don't come from the neshama of Adam HaRishon. Like we know, ki yadua, the neshama of the Alter Rebbe. A neshama chadasha doesn't mean a soul that was never here before. Every soul was here before in the soul of Adam HaRishon. Neshama chadasha means that there are certain neshamas that will be introduced to the world after Mashiach's coming, that they're not even part of the neshama of Adam. But that's connected, and that sheds a lot of light to these different chazals about Adam and about his diminution, and then subsequently, we were granted now a more detailed avodah. Since Adam and Chava didn't do it on their own, we have our little chelik. So together with you, together with me, Yidden that live misoifa olam ba'at soifai l'miksei hashmayim aktsei hashmayim, collectively, we're going to do our avodah of both being mevader the world, and then ultimately the avodah of yichudim, of bringing God into this world, God willing, to be continued.